Sir, I need you to move to seat 32B, the flight attendant said, her tone clipped and firm. We have a family that needs to sit together, and your seat is the only one available. The old man looked up from his aisle seat, the one he'd paid extra for months ago due to a service injury. I booked this for medical reasons, he said quietly, but she didn't budge. If you don't move, we can't close the doors. So he stood, limped down the aisle, and sat alone between two strangers, in pain. 9 minutes later, the cockpit door opened and the captain walked out. What he did next changed the meaning of that flight forever. Hi everyone, welcome to Echo Tales. The early boarding call echoed through Terminal C at Denver International Airport. It was barely 6:30 in the morning, but Frank Delaney had been sitting at Gate 27 for over an hour, hands folded, posture upright, a quiet stillness about him that came only with age and discipline. At 78, Frank looked exactly like what he was, an old man in a soft tan jacket, black slacks, and worn-out walking shoes. But if you watched long enough, you'd notice the limp, subtle, but there. Left knee stiff. The kind of injury that doesn't come from age, but from war. Frank had booked this flight 3 months ago. He was headed to Annapolis, Maryland, from Rock Springs, Wyoming, to watch his granddaughter graduate from the U.S. Naval Academy, first in the family to ever wear the uniform after him. He wasn't going to miss it. That's why he'd paid extra out of his fixed pension for seat 14C, an aisle seat, premium economy, just enough legroom to ease the pressure on his bad knee. Not a luxury, a necessity. He boarded early per his group, no fuss, no fanfare, just a quiet thank you to the gate agent and a steady hand on the rail as he made his way down the jet bridge. When he reached his seat, he lowered himself with care, stowed his small duffel beneath the seat in front of him, and exhaled. It was a rare moment of relief. That was before the commotion began. 3 rows ahead, someone was waving down a flight attendant. A woman in her 30s, sharp uniform, practiced smile. Her name tag read, Kayla. She leaned in to speak with a passenger, then tapped her tablet, frowning. Then she turned. She walked straight toward Frank. "Excuse me, sir," she said, soft but firm. "Are you seated in 14C?" Frank looked up, nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Kayla crouched slightly to his level, smile still in place. "We have a family that got separated during booking, a mother with 2 young kids. They're currently in 3 separate rows. Your seat, along with the 2 beside it, is the only block available where they can sit together." Frank's brow furrowed slightly. "This is my assigned seat. I booked it early because of a service-connected knee injury." Kayla's smile didn't falter, but there was a pause. "I understand, sir. We really appreciate your cooperation. It's just for this flight." Frank sat back. The silence between them stretched thin. He wasn't trying to be difficult, but he had chosen this exact seat, paid for it, because anything else meant 5 hours of pain. He glanced toward the front of the plane. The mother, holding a toddler, was standing in the aisle, 2 other children nearby. Then he looked down at his own hands, scarred, steady. "What's the alternative?" he asked quietly. Kayla tapped her screen again. "We can offer you seat 32B. It's further back, middle row." Frank blinked. "Middle seat?" "Yes, sir. It's the only seat left unoccupied." He didn't say anything. Just let the information settle. Seat 32B meant no legroom, no stretch. Sandwiched between 2 strangers, near the lavatories, near the turbulence. He knew the layout well. "I'm sorry, Mom," Frank said, calm but firm. "But I really can't sit back there. My leg won't make it through the flight." Kayla's smile thinned just a touch. I do understand, sir, she said, but we really need to seat this family together. If you choose not to move, we may not be able to depart on time. And there it was, the implication that he'd be holding up the flight. Frank glanced around. Other passengers were starting to watch. The nearby rows had gone quiet. He could feel the shift, the weight of 100 silent judgments, an old man refusing to help a mother with children, a selfish passenger, a problem. His jaw tightened. He looked up at Kayla. "This is not acceptable," he said quietly. "I'll note that, sir," she replied. "But I need a decision." A full breath passed. Then slowly, Frank unbuckled his seatbelt. He rose stiffly, gripping the headrest for balance. With a voice low but controlled, he said, "Name's Frank Delaney. Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. I'd like it noted that I gave up a medically necessary seat under pressure." Kayla only nodded, already motioning the family forward. As Frank gathered his bag and turned down the aisle, the toddler looked up at him and smiled. He gave the boy a gentle nod. No resentment, no drama, just resignation. Seat 32B was exactly as he imagined. Tight, cramped, wedged between a college kid in headphones and a businessman already elbowing for armrest space. The overhead light was broken. The air smelled faintly of cleaning fluid and stale coffee. Frank lowered himself slowly, grimacing as his knee bent tighter than it should. He said nothing, just rested his hands on his lap and closed his eyes. No one noticed him. No one offered help. No one said a word. But someone was watching. 3 rows ahead, across the aisle, a woman in her 40s sat quietly. She'd boarded just before Frank, laptop in her lap, blazer folded neatly beside her. She'd heard everything, watched everything. And now she watched him, hunched in that tight seat, the lines on his face deeper than before. She reached for her phone, not to post, not to complain, but to message a contact, a friend who worked in customer relations at the airline. Her message was short. Passenger Frank Delaney forced to give up aisle seat 14C, despite confirmed booking and medical need. Now seated 32B, flight 306. Crew dismissive, please escalate. She hit send, then set the phone down and stared out the window. She didn't know what would come of it. But some moments, you didn't stay silent. Some moments, you just acted, even when no one else did. Frank Delaney sat still in seat 32B, hands folded over his stomach, shoulders drawn in. The middle seat always made you feel smaller, but this felt like vanishing. His knee throbbed. Every few minutes, he shifted slightly, just enough to keep the pain from locking in. But there was nowhere to go. His left leg pressed awkwardly against the seat back in front of him. No room to extend. No aisle to lean into. The college kid on his right kept his headphones on, lost in some movie. The businessman on the left tapped away on his laptop, his elbows spilling into Frank's space like he owned it. No one said anything. No one even made eye contact. Frank wasn't angry, just tired. He'd lived long enough to know what it meant to be inconvenient. It wasn't new. 3 rows ahead, the woman in the blazer, Charlotte Hayes, watched from the corner of her eye. She hadn't opened her laptop again. Instead, she studied the old man as the cabin buzzed around him. She noticed his hands, thick knuckles, one finger bent slightly to the side. Not from age, from injury. They rested on his lap, still as stone. But the tension in them was unmistakable, like he was holding something inside. Rage, maybe, or sorrow, or just wait. When the flight attendants came through for final checks, no one looked his way. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a nod and a tug on the overhead bin before moving on. Charlotte's phone buzzed in her palm. A reply. Received. Forwarding to ops. Unacceptable. Will notify cabin if escalated. She didn't expect much, but at least she tried. The cabin doors closed with a solid thunk. The safety briefing began. Frank leaned back, eyes still shut. Somewhere in the hum of the engines, the pre-flight video droned on. Oxygen masks, seatbelts, tray tables, but all Frank could hear was the quiet throb of memory, like a distant engine from long ago. The sound of boots on jungle ground, the voice of a young man yelling for a corpsman. The moment his knee shattered under fire, he shifted again and winced. His hand found the edge of the armrest, but it wasn't there. The businessman's elbow remained parked, unmoved. Frank said nothing. In the cockpit, Captain David Miller adjusted his headset. Former Air Force, 23 years in service, 11,000 flight hours, a man of precision and habits forged in steel. His co-pilot read out pre-flight checks as ground control cleared them for takeoff. Then his console lit up, a red notification. Passenger concern flagged by corporate liaison. His brow furrowed. He tapped the screen. Passenger, Frank Delaney. Flight TC 306. Issue, veteran forced from medically necessary seat. Below it, a name he recognized, Charlotte Hayes. Diamond, elite PR board advisor. He blinked. Delaney. The name hit him like a jolt. He turned in his seat. Hold the taxi, he said. His co-pilot looked over, surprised. Captain? But David was already unbuckling. Hold position. I'll be back in 3. He stepped into the narrow corridor behind the cockpit and signaled to the lead flight attendant. The passenger from 14C. The attendant, a senior woman named Arlene, hesitated, then pointed toward the back. A man was relocated to accommodate a family. He's in 32B. David nodded once. No anger, no judgment, just resolve. He adjusted the cuffs of his uniform, smoothed the gold stripes on his shoulders, and began walking. Charlotte spotted him first. The entire cabin seemed to sense the shift in energy as the cockpit door opened. Passengers turned, phones lowered. David Miller's presence didn't demand attention. It earned it. Measured steps, eyes scanning, calm and focused, until he stopped. Row 32. He looked down. Frank Delaney sat with eyes half open, startled by the sudden shadow. He looked up and froze. The captain stood tall, immaculate, uniform crisp, flight bars, silver wings. And then, with no hesitation, Captain David Miller raised his right hand and rendered a crisp, formal salute. The air in the cabin changed. Charlotte felt it first. The silence was total. Frank's eyes searched the man's face, confused, unsure. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, the captain said, voice clear and unwavering. On behalf of Transcontinental Airlines and as a fellow serviceman, I offer you my deepest apologies. Frank blinked. You should not have been asked to move from your seat, the captain continued. It was an error, and we're going to make it right. Passengers whispered. Someone lowered their tray table slowly, watching. David turned to the aisle. Is Miss Kayla Bennett in the cabin? The young flight attendant, pale now, stepped forward from the galley. Yes, sir. You will personally escort Staff Sergeant Delaney to seat 1A. Kayla hesitated. Captain, first class is... If 1A is occupied, David interrupted, you will ask for a volunteer. If no one volunteers, explain that the captain of this aircraft is requesting that seat on behalf of a decorated combat veteran. Frank started to rise, but David raised a hand. Please, let us correct this. We owe you that much. Frank sat, stunned. Charlotte saw it, the flicker of disbelief, and something else. Recognition. Gratitude. He stood slowly, carefully. His knee buckled slightly, but David steadied him with a hand under the elbow. The businessman beside him moved aside, awkward now. The college student removed his headphones, shame flickering in his eyes. As they turned toward the front of the plane, David glanced back and nodded once to Charlotte Hayes. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. None were needed. Charlotte sat back in her seat, breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what part of her had needed to see that happen, but she knew something deep in her chest had just settled. The kind of settling that only happens when justice, long delayed, finally stands up. The moment Frank Delaney stepped into the aisle, something happened. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. People moved. The businessman who hadn't given him a second glance now shifted awkwardly, eyes lowered. The young man in the window seat stood up quickly, muttering, "Sir, sorry, sir." Though Frank hadn't asked for anything, Captain Miller didn't let go of his elbow until he was steady. Then he looked toward Kayla, who stood frozen halfway down the aisle, her tablet clutched like a shield. "Miss Bennet," he said calmly, "seat 1A. Now." "Yes, Captain," she replied, voice smaller than before. She stepped forward, leading the way. Frank followed, slowly, painfully. Every step stiff, careful. That knee hadn't been right in 50 years, probably never would be. But now he walked with dignity, and every row he passed felt it. Passengers turned. Some murmured, others simply watched. And one man, middle-aged, ball cap on his knee, reached up and touched his chest with an open palm. A silent salute. Charlotte Hayes sat still, hands folded in her lap, breath held. She didn't reach for her phone this time. She just watched, eyes full. The plane wasn't in motion, but something had shifted. When they reached row 1, Kayla stopped. She turned toward the passenger, already seated in 1A. A man in a pressed polo, sipping from a branded water bottle. Oblivious to the drama. Behind him. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, voice hesitant. "We need to reassign your seat." The man blinked, confused. "Wait, what? Captain's request?" She nodded. He turned and saw Frank. Saw the stripes on the worn duffel, the age in his face, the quiet exhaustion. The man nodded. Didn't argue, didn't ask questions. He just stood. "Sir," he said to Frank quietly, "it's an honor." Frank didn't know what to say. He just dipped his head, grateful. Captain Miller turned to Kayla again. "If that seat had not been given," he said, loud enough for the first 6 rows to hear, "I would have reassigned my co-pilot's jump seat." He paused. "And if that wasn't available, I would have given up mine." Kayla's mouth parted slightly, but she said nothing. The statement wasn't for her. It was for everyone listening, and they were all listening now. Frank lowered himself into the spacious leather seat of 1A. It wasn't just the extra leg room. It was the angle of it, the quiet, the dignity. The crew brought him a blanket, a fresh bottle of water, an apology, but that wasn't what broke him. It was the voice from halfway down the aisle. A young man stood, late 30s, shaved head, jeans and a hoodie. His voice shook when he spoke. "Staff Sergeant Delaney?" Frank turned his head. "I served under you," the man said. "Camp Leatherneck." Ich bin Alter Frank stared. Then slowly his expression softened. "Corporal Reeves," the man said, "you saved my life. We never got to thank you." His voice cracked. He blinked rapidly, tried to say more, failed. He just nodded, chest heaving, and sat down again. Tears streamed silently down his face. Frank looked away, jaw set. But the silence around him had changed again. This time, it wasn't born of discomfort. It was reverence. Captain Miller stepped into the intercom alcove, adjusted the switch, and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang through the cabin, steady and deliberate. "Before we depart, I need to make a brief announcement." Every head turned. Today, a mistake was made. A man who served this country, who carries the visible and invisible scars of that service, was asked to give up his seat. Not because of airline error, but because of a policy that prioritizes convenience over honor. He paused. Let the words hang. "Let me be clear. We will not take off while injustice sits quietly in our cabin." A hush swept the plane. He, Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He fought in Khe Sanh, Vietnam. He has worn the uniform longer than most of us have drawn breath. He didn't ask for special treatment. He simply asked to keep the seat he booked, so his leg wouldn't lock up from a service injury. Another beat. "We failed him." David's voice softened, but it didn't waver. "But we don't leave our own behind. Not in combat. Not at 30,000 feet." He looked down the aisle, toward Charlotte, toward the veteran still quietly crying 2 rows behind her, toward the passengers who had once looked away, but now sat straighter. "And if that means this flight runs 10 minutes late," he said, "then I'll take every one of those minutes with pride." He clicked off the mic, and the cabin, already breathless, broke into applause. Not loud, not forced. It began with one pair of hands, then another, until row by row, section by section, it rolled like a wave. Frank didn't raise his hand, didn't bow his head. He just sat there, still, silent, seen. Charlotte wiped the corner of her eye, and for the first time in years, she believed something she had almost forgotten. Honor doesn't fade. It just waits for the right moment to rise again. The plane landed just after noon in Annapolis, Maryland. The wheels kissed the runway with a gentle hum, and sunlight filtered through the windows like a quiet blessing. As passengers gathered their belongings and rose from their seats, Frank Delaney remained seated in 1A, hands resting calmly on his knees. He wasn't in a hurry. For once, he didn't feel forgotten. When the flight crew thanked him at the door, they didn't just say it out of habit, they meant it. And when Charlotte Hayes passed him in the jet bridge, she simply touched his shoulder and whispered, "You reminded all of us who we're supposed to be." The granddaughter stood near baggage claim, her midshipman uniform pressed and sharp, holding a handmade sign that read, "Welcome, Grandpa Frank." When she saw him limping toward her, she dropped the sign and ran. He didn't brace. He let her hug him full force, like a wave hitting a seawall. "Your knees," she cried, pulling back. "I've had worse," he smiled. And for the first time in a long time, the smile reached all the way to his eyes. They sat for hours that afternoon. He asked about her studies, her ship placement, her plans after commissioning. She asked what had happened on the flight, confused by the texts and news alerts already filling her phone. Frank kept it simple. "I had a bad seat," he said, and someone stood up. She nodded quietly. But later that night, when she saw the video online, the one someone had recorded of Captain Miller's speech over the intercom, she cried. Then she hugged him again and didn't let go. The next week, Frank received a letter in the mail. Transcontinental Airlines. Inside was a formal apology, a full refund for the flight, and a card. "Dear Mr. Delaney, as of today, you are designated a lifetime guest of honor with Transcontinental Airlines. No more booking codes, no more fees. Just tell us where you're going. We'll get you there. TCA Veterans Council." He folded the letter twice, set it beside the flag in his study, and said nothing. 2 weeks later, Another envelope arrived. This one was hand-addressed. The seal in the corner read, Department of the Army, Office of Military Records inside, a short typed note. They had reopened his personnel file after a public inquiry. A retired officer, now working in archiving, had flagged a long-overlooked action report from Vietnam. February 1968. Key Sun. It documented that Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney had pulled 6 wounded Marines from a burning vehicle under heavy enemy fire, alone, with a knee already shattered by shrapnel. The file had been marked incomplete and lost in the chaos of that year. Now it was restored. At the bottom of the letter was a signature, General James E. Lockhart, and a second sheet, handwritten. Frank, I was Corporal Turber, number 3 in that vehicle. You don't know me, but I've known you every day since. I'm alive because of what you did. I made it home. I made a family. I made a life. All because a Marine who limped worse than me refused to let go. Thank you. You were never invisible. General J. Lockhart, USMC, retired. Frank sat with that letter for a long, long time. No words, just silence and breath. Elsewhere, in a quiet home office in Richmond, Virginia, Charlotte Hayes typed steadily on her laptop. She didn't embellish, she didn't dramatize, she just told the story as it happened. The man who was asked to move, the captain who stood up, the silence that turned into a standing ovation. She submitted it to a regional publication. It got picked up, local news ran it, then national. By week's end, the salute at 32B had become a headline. A story read aloud at school assemblies. A post printed and tacked to the wall of 100 VFW halls. The photo of Frank sitting in 1A, head bowed, sunlight falling gently on his weathered hands, became something of an icon, not of fame, of remembrance. Frank Delaney didn't change much after that. Still lived in the same small house in Rock Springs, still drank his coffee black, still limped to the mailbox every morning, even if it hurt. But something inside him had shifted. He held his head just a bit higher when he walked. He didn't flinch when strangers approached. And sometimes, when he sat on the porch at dusk, watching the sun dip low behind the hills, he smiled, not because he was proud, but because for the first time in a long, long while, he had been seen. Not all sacrifices are written in medals. Not all battles end with banners. But sometimes all it takes is one voice to say, "We remember." And when that happens, a seat becomes more than a seat. It becomes something sacred, a return to dignity, a return to honor, a return to home. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever.